Hello, everyone. It's Jim of Shiloh Kahal. The argument that the Hebrew calendar day is measured from evening to evening, and the argument that Exodus chapter 12 and specifically verses 6 through 18 also argue for and advocate for an evening to evening measurement of the Hebrew calendar day creates a dilemma for day 14 and the Passover. Let me explain. If the day starts with evening, and we must kill the Passover lamb at evening on the 14th, then the lamb is killed first thing, and a full day passes before the Passover meal. And if we are to eat our Passover meal at evening following the daytime period of day 14, then all of the events relating to Passover take place on day 15, from the killing of the Passover lamb to the destruction of what's left in the morning. Why would we even have a Passover on day 14 if there are no events in the day? Let's explore what I mean. So here's an illustration of an evening to evening construct of a Hebrew calendar day, whereby the evening would be defined by the setting of the sun. So the sun sets behind the horizon. It first disappears behind the horizon. Now we know that following the setting of the sun, we will have a twilight period of time, starting with a civil twilight, then a nautical twilight, and then an astronomical twilight. And then we'll go into the nighttime period, or dusk. We'll start with dusk, and then we go into the nighttime period. And then we're going to have a twilight period as the sun is coming back around, where we're going to start with an astronomical twilight, then a nautical twilight, then a civil twilight as the sun is approaching the horizon. And once the sun breaks the horizon, we start a daytime period. We now have the daytime period of that day. So let's consider what this looks like then when we consider day 14 and the instructions of day 14 and day 15. So the command of Exodus 12:6 is that we shall keep our Passover lamb until the 14th day of this month, and then the whole assembly of the congregation shall kill the lamb. Depends on what version you read, but they will kill the lamb at either evening or twilight. But either way, let's consider what this means on this timeline. Since evening is the very first thing of a day, what they're being instructed to do is to keep it until the evening of the 14th, to keep it until the day of the 14th and then kill it at evening. Well, if evening is first, they were being instructed to kill the lamb right here at evening, very first part of that day. And whether the translation says evening and you kill it when the sun goes down, when the sun has set, or if you follow the translations that say at twilight, okay, so we have that period of time that follows the setting of the sun, so we have a small period of time. But either way, you are killing the lamb before the nighttime period. And we're going to have roughly 12 hours of nighttime, including the morning twilight. And then we're going to have roughly 12 hours of daylight period of time. And then the instructions of Exodus 12:7 are to take some of the blood of the lamb and place it over your lintel, which would be done, would need to be done here, right after you killed the lamb. But then you move on to Exodus 12:8, and it reads, that same night they are to eat the meat roasted over fire along with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. Well, think about that. If the command is to kill, you keep the Passover lamb until the 14th and you kill it at evening, which would be the first thing. And then you are told to eat it that night. You're being told to eat it first thing. So we would be doing all of this at the very first part of day 14. So let's recap here. So first of all, Exodus 12:6 says we are to keep the Passover lamb until the 14th and then kill it at evening or twilight, which would be here. And this would have been right after the daylight period of the 13th. So the day that everybody would have been experiencing would have been the end of the 13th day in the working and daylight hours of the 13th day. And as we approached that evening, and when the evening came at the end of the 13th day, we would be killing the lamb our Passover lamb at either evening or twilight. And then, according to Exodus 12:7, we would have placed some of the blood over our lintel. And then, according to Exodus 12:8, we would have eaten with bitter herbs. We would have roasted the lamb and eaten the bitter herbs that night. We would have eaten the lamb with bitter herbs that night. So we would have eaten the lamb before the daylight hours of day 14. And I suppose that is a possibility, but that's not what we have seen historically being shown us. What we normally see and what we normally see advocated is that we have this daylight period of time here on the 14th. And at the end of that daylight period of time, this day of preparation, then you would have the killing of the lamb. I mean, you can see this in the gospel accounts and different things that they're illustrating it this way. So at the end of the daylight period of time, we are we're killing the lamb. But if the instruction is to kill the lamb at evening or at twilight, we have moved into day 15. And if that's the case, and if we didn't kill the lamb immediately on the 14th and didn't eat the lamb, that night on the 14th, the very first part of the 14th, then really we have nothing happening these nighttime hours of the 14th, and we have nothing happening during the daylight hours of the 14th, and we are killing the lamb at evening, at the beginning of, or twilight, either one, of the 15th. And then on the 15th, we are roasting our Passover lamb with bitter herbs and eating the Passover lamb. And we are placing the blood over our lentils here. And then, because we know in Exodus that's the same night that the destroyer came through, well, the destroyer would be coming through on the 15th, around midnight. And also, because we're instructed that day 15 is also the first day of unleavened bread, we are having unleavened bread. We're conflating unleavened bread with the Pesah meal. So basically, all of the events, oh, and by the way, this is also our Shabbat. We're called to keep the Shabbat starting at evening on day 15, which would be the end of the daylight hours on day 14. And, it would be with the killing of the Passover lamb at evening. That would also be starting our Shabbat because that's day 15. So we have really, if you think about it, we have nothing happening on day 14 unless we are killing the lamb, unless we're going to kill the lamb before the evening on day 14. We have nothing happening here in an evening to evening illustration if you did not kill the lamb first thing and eat it the night before the daylight period of day 14. But that's not what we've seen portrayed to us historically, and it's really not what's portrayed to us in the gospel accounts, and it's not what folks who are advocating for an evening to evening construct of the day, and then using Exodus 12 and the Passover meal, and then the crucifixion week as evidences. That's not what they're portraying. They're portraying all of this happening on the 15th. And if that's the case, and if you think about it, nothing's happening on the 14th, and everything's happening on the 15th. So then why would we even have the day, the 14th of the month, day 14 even allocated or given to us as Passover day? Now, I do know, and I'll recognize that there are a couple passages where it references 7 days of eating unleavened bread, because one of the commands is to eat unleavened bread for the Passover meal. And I'll just quickly tell you and just acknowledge that there are a couple of passages where it talks about not eating bread, like Exodus 12:15, you're to eat, for 7 days you're to eat bread made without yeast. So when folks are hearing that you have 7 days and you have to run, according to Exodus 12:18, you have to run those 7 days ideally from the 14th to the 21st. You can't make it happen easily because that's 8 days. But I think what everybody's doing is they're conflating, and they're not keeping the Passover separate from the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And the Passover does involve a meal, and that meal involves unleavened bread, roasted lamb, and bitter herbs. And then on day 15, we start the 7 days of eating bread that is unleavened bread. Let me show you how this can be simply fixed by changing the start of the day to a morning to morning. Okay, so here's an illustration of a morning to morning, which would be sunrise to sunrise construct of the Hebrew calendar day. So you would have been instructed to keep the Passover lamb until day 14. So you've got the Passover lamb, you're keeping the Passover lamb. And then the instruction is in 12:6 that on day 14 at evening or twilight, makes no difference, in the middle of day 14, we are instructed to kill that lamb. And then according to 12:7, we are to place the blood over our lintels, over our doorpost. And then we are instructed to roast the lamb and eat it with bitter herbs and unleavened bread that very same night. So we begin eating on the 14th, we begin eating our Passover meal. While they were eating their Passover meal that night, the angel of death did come on day 14. The angel of death did come in the middle of the night and passed over them. And so then according to, I believe it's 12:9, they're instructed to everything that's left over as they're approaching the morning hours, which would be here, the twilight hours of the morning. You need to start getting rid of it because the next day starts the Feast of Unleavened Bread, where we do have 7 days of eating unleavened bread. And the first day we experience here on day 1 is going to be a Shabbat, as is our 7th day. Occam's razor. We don't have to add any complications. We don't have to do anything. It all fits. Every instruction of Exodus fits. It fits here nice and neat. In closing, I will address in Exodus 12:19, where they do introduce a concept of an evening to evening type idea here. And it reads like this: in the first month, on the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. Now, some are taking this to, like they do with Leviticus 23:32, they're taking this at evening to be instructions regarding the construct of a day, but it's not. If you follow this, if you are following on this spreadsheet, on this illustration, we are going to start at evening on the 14th day. Now, we didn't say the day started there. The day started back here. But the evening on the 14th taking place here is the first time we will eat unleavened bread. And then we will eat unleavened bread for the rest of that week until we reach day 21, which would be the last day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So from the evening of Passover, when we are commanded to eat with unleavened bread, until the evening of the 21st day, which is the last day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, we are to eat unleavened bread. That is all that is sharing. Okay, well, thanks for your time. If you think I'm correct, if you think my positions and the logic that I'm sharing is correct, then please like and share so that others can see and hear the argument as well. Well, thank you, and may you be Baruch.